Hey everyone, my name is Christina Wong. I'm the CMO of Flux, and I just want to thank you for joining today's webinar AI code generation reality check, what the data says about shipping AI code safely. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes, so just hang tight. Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Christina Wong, and I'm the CMO of Flux, and I will be moderating today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Flux, Flux is a code-first engineering intelligence platform, and it gives engineering leaders ground truth visibility into velocity, risk, and team performance so they can lead confidently in the age of AI accelerated development. We are going to start with a few housekeeping items. As we know, everyone right now is thinking about how to deal with AI generated code within their organizations. Today, our goal is not just to share the results of the survey conducted by Dimensional Research. We also want to engage with you, our guests, and discuss what these results mean for you and your engineering teams. So we want everyone to join in. Along those lines, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see an option for Q&A. Please submit specific questions for our presenters in the Q&A tab. You can also share your stories, perspectives, and thoughts there. Our Flux team will be active to facilitate and answer questions. We will do our best to answer questions as they come up in the webinar and also leave time at the end for additional conversation. And if we don't get to your question during the session, we will follow up in an email. We are recording today's webinar and will email you the recording and copy of the survey report within a few days. Lastly, if you are having any problems with streaming audio, video, or any other type of thing, please try closing out Zoom and re-entering. And if that doesn't solve your problem, then let us know via Q&A and we will do our best to help you. Now, let's meet our speakers, Ted Julian and Aaron Beals. Ted is the founder and CEO of Flux. He's a serial entrepreneur and has co-founded and scaled 3 companies to successful acquisition, including Resilient Systems, Arbor Networks, and At Stake. He has over 20 years of cybersecurity and software experience. Ted's fun fact, when asked about Ted, his favorite AI says he runs marathons and builds startups. So he's basically someone who builds things with both his head and his heart. Aaron is Flux's CTO. He has over 20 years experience building and scaling engineering teams, including Endeca and Netezza, Harvard Medical School, and Appsembler. For Aaron's fun fact, Aaron says that he has hiked half of the Adirondack high peaks, but it's a mystery whether he has hiked 23 or halfway up all 46. He refuses to say. Today, we will discuss 5 key findings from Dimensional Research's survey, which explores how AI generated code is changing work at enterprise engineering organizations. We are going to dig into how teams work with AI generated code, organization concerns, and what high performing teams do differently. So, I just want to give you some quick context on this report. Dimensional Research surveyed people who could speak from hands on experience with AI generated code, including both practitioners and engineering leaders. The respondents spanned 5 continents, so 63% of them in the US or Canada, 22% in Europe, and the rest split across Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and Australia and New Zealand. Company sizes range from 100 employees up through enterprises over 10,000 employees. 33% of respondents were from organizations with 1,000 to 5,000 employees. The titles ran from manager and up. Population was 54% managers, 29% directors, and 17% VP, GM, or C-level executives. 93% of respondents manage people who review code, and 59% personally review code themselves. With that, I hope you get some more context about the survey. We are now going to dig into the findings, and I will hand it over to Ted. Thank you.
Thanks a ton, Christina. And it's great to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. What's probably not a surprise is that whether or not people are going to use AI to generate code, I think is a sort of foregone conclusion. People have, by and large, jumped into this. What was interesting, however, about the survey results is that it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to prototype something or do a proof of concept, things of this nature. And it's a very different thing to say, oh, we're going to put this into production, and especially if your environment happens to be like an incredibly sensitive one or highly performant one or massive number of customers, availability is an issue, and on and on and on and on. What is interesting, however, is that in addition to this gap, in other words, between playing around with the technology for prototyping to being in production, is the fact that the vast majority, you can see here, a little over 80%, have not just played around with code generation, but have in some way or another started to change their organization's development processes in light of this huge shift. Where the opportunities for, I guess, improvement and progress and what we see talking with our customers about this issue is the next level of concerns. So, for example, getting more reliably into production, putting guardrails on these things as you're contemplating doing so to try to prevent surprises or disasters, moving beyond sort of individual devs on individual sort of pull requests, things of this nature, features, to more agentic approaches where devs are managing multiple agents to do things. And then ultimately trying to get to improve ROI. These are all areas of rapid kind of consideration and progress and very dynamic and less obvious kind of what the answers are and what the best practices are. However, these are basically many of the topics that we're going to be talking about. Some survey results on some of these different issues, as well as some of our own thoughts that we see when we engage with customers. But we'd like to know kind of what you think. So at this point, let's go ahead and launch our first poll to get an opportunity for you all to weigh in. So what do you think, Aaron? Where are people going to land on this one?
Oh, great question. I think it's going to depend on where people are in their org size. But if I had to guess, I think a bunch of folks are going to be actively shipping AI generated code to production.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think we tend to attract a little bit more sophisticated people, maybe better looking. I don't know why.
But,
But let's see what people thought.
It's also big orgs. I think that some larger orgs, just because you're doing this doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it across the board. And so I think, for some teams, they may have moved from piloting with a small team to, we piloted it, it stayed in internal, and then we put something into production. So that would let you check.
Very, very true. Something to consider for the future, right? Like, yeah, we got 3 teams out of 10 and they're going crazy. Like, I don't know how to answer this question. Okay. Uh, let's move on. So, what does this AI adoption mean for you specifically? Like, where is it going to have the most impact, and what do you think about guardrails? You can see some of the different topics here. Um, what we certainly see is probably not surprising when we talk to customers, and I alluded to this before, which is greenfields, new dev, especially if it might be prototypes or proof of concepts. This is the low-hanging fruit that a lot of people start with, and generally experience almost intoxicating results just because it is remarkable how much you can do and how quickly, even with pretty small teams. But this is certainly a journey as people move beyond that and try to move into production or move into more complex environments. Um, I'll turn it over to you, Aaron, maybe to share some of the things that you've seen either internally or in your conversations with customers.
Sure. Yeah, so it is, again, as I mentioned before, and I'll probably repeat this again as we talk. It is folks are on a journey. They're very often we start with the lowest risk things and also the highest value, and very often, as you mentioned, that shows up as prototyping. We certainly started there. It's been a game changer for our product development process, trying out new features, being able to do so quickly and not have to necessarily just work from mocks to testing. I mean, look, every engineering team is going to say the same thing. I mean, testing is always a thing that everyone goes, yeah, we know. And even if you claim to be test driven, doing full test driven development, it is still something you can make it better. You can always do better. And, having AI alongside you, looking at it and saying, well, let's build out these test cases. That has been a huge game changer for folks and sort of has helped address something that's been a longstanding problem. So that I think you said like you quick wins. That's a huge win. That's something that people very often start there. Um, the thing that stands out to me as I look at this list, though, it is certainly four. This is something as very often we're having conversations with leaders of these engineering teams. We're talking to people who are not just responsible for the output, they're not just responsible for the quality of the code, the security, getting the features built. They're also responsible for the people involved, and this is a major change to the software development life cycle. And it hits people, and you again, it goes back to where you are in that AI adoption journey. But very early on, it's trust. People on the team are reviewing your engineers are reviewing code you didn't write. And that's harder than writing it because when you write code, you're actually kind of reviewing it as you go. You have a sense of what's going on. Now you have to review what is coming out of AI, out of an agent, and you're also on the hook for code that you didn't fully author. You were still responsible for it, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. Then as teams evolve, it becomes measurement. And so as soon as leadership starts tracking AI adoption, teams want to know, okay, what are these numbers being used for? And what we've seen is, engineers, frontline managers, they're not afraid of being measured. That's been going on for a long time. They're being afraid of being judged on tool usage instead of outcomes. And then sort of underneath it all, and not often said out loud, but we still hear it is, you have juniors asking if their job's at risk. You have seniors asking if they're just serving as the cleanup crew. And then the one that really sticks out, to me at least, is that if if the AI is doing the work that historically the juniors were to learn on, how do people become senior in order to build systems? So these are the kind of things that engineering leaders wrestle with as they go through this. The teams that are furthest along have often moved past sort of should we do this? You mentioned this earlier, Ted, to how and how to where. Where is this going to have the most leverage? Is it for test and scaffolding? Are we going to still keep human eyes on our core business logic?
Yeah, I'm glad you spent a lot of time on the people issues. Because I think things are changing, but clearly in the early days of this revolution, everybody was talking about the tooling for all the different discrete tasks. And maybe like the junior devs issue would kind of come up. But as we move along, and certainly as we talk with more customers, some of the people issues you mentioned are coming up a lot more, are increasingly viewed as sort of the more strategic, the harder things to tackle. And what I've heard, in addition to the things that you mentioned, is just how diverse and chaotic the team and the roles that they're playing is becoming, and the challenges that that can create. Because you want it on the one hand, especially if it's helping unlock, further progress or velocity. But if you don't really know what's going on, it can make it very difficult to manage and motivate people appropriately, because it becomes kind of shadow work that's not counted, measured, given credit for, or not, like whatever is appropriate. And then the last thing I would add is like, who's the team, right? Like, marketing is creating apps, salespeople are creating apps, customer success is creating apps. And at the end of the day, if something goes wrong with any of those things, who exactly built it and maybe how it was done is going to sort of be less important than how do we just make this right now, and then we'll like worry about the postmortem. And I think this is something that rightly has a lot of engineering and IT leaders really, really concerned. Because on the one hand, you don't want to be the no squad. There's this incredible revolution, an enormous opportunity to unlock productivity and so on. Yeah, there's risk kind of everywhere you look. We've talked about some of it. We'll be talking about more. All right, let's move on to the next one. Oh,
Yeah.
and here I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So we're going to get to some, I'll go quickly through the next few slides, just go through some of the data from the survey. We want to hear from all of you as well. So nearly 2/3 of respondents, or about 65%, thought that AI could outperform humans at certain aspects of code review. And the reason we talk about code review a lot, comes up a lot, is it often becomes the bottleneck. Velocity is increasing. We're able to produce much more, just a higher volume of code. And so it puts the burden on code review. And so, these leaders saw opportunity in applying standards more consistently across those reviews, spotting certain patterns, good and bad, across code bases, catching more issues, and also being available around the clock. This is something that people are doing things as far as having agents run and look for issues overnight. So there are clear opportunities here. But what we've heard and seen clearly is that there are these bottlenecks, and these bottlenecks move around as you and your team are progressing in adopting AI. So we see in the next slide is, leaders are getting concerned because lack of code understanding code changes can potentially lead to issues. What we actually heard that surprised us a bit was that 63% said that the org could stay on top of it. They could keep on top of the week to week code changes. But that means that there's another 30% who said they couldn't, and 7 who weren't really sure. And when you look at the issues that they said were actually hardest to detect, it's the kind of categories that they're most likely to cause a sort of costly, high severity incident: security issues, dependency changes, performance impacts. So I think, from our standpoint, that 63% is worth a second look. If keeping on top of changes in general is not the same thing as catching these kind of specific changes that might hurt you. And so this is, in our view, the review capacity problem showing up again from a different angle. There's both more code to review, and there's also difficulty spotting the categories of change that, like these, that carry the most risk. And so how this shows up is risk to production. It's harder to pick up things that like technical debt, things like complexity, which is with a top challenge in understanding a code base, doesn't usually get introduced with a single change, a single PR. It's something that builds up over time and then suddenly appears as a failure. And so, this is, now we're into the zone where, okay, well, we're using AI, we can move fast, but you don't want that failure. You have one failure, you have a problem you have to then deal with. And this is in the face of much higher volume of change. And so, this is the data that this we found out from our survey, but we're curious what you think. Our next poll is going to ask you, what's your biggest blocker to trusting AI generated code in production. So Ted, what do you think? What do you think people are going to say here? You're biased though. You're a security guy.
I
So
have walked miles in those shoes. That's true. Uh, I'm going to go with review bandwidth. I just feel like if we're talking about the bulk of the market, that's kind of where they're stuck right now.
yeah, okay, yeah. I'll admit it's certainly what I heard in a recent discussion with vice presidents of engineering. That one came up, but I'm going to say maybe it's a dark horse here. The clear guardrails are policy. I think guardrails are something that as teams are starting to do this, that they're worried about um, having those checks in place. And we'll talk. I know we're going to talk in a bit about those and how people approach it. But um, yeah, that's what I think.
Well, it turns out we're both wrong.
What? What? Okay.
Dang it. Yeah. Apparently team skepticism or resistance. That was my dark horse.
Ooh,
That was like
okay.
my number two.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I did talk about a bunch before. The team thing is a huge factor.
Well, and I think
Okay.
in general, like if you read the press, you just assume like everybody's got dark factories with agents coding like all day long and nobody has to do like a work. But of
Sure.
course,
Sure.
the truth is a lot messier and not that sophisticated.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah. So to get into that, I mean, that's a good segue into our next. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these incident risks and what they mean for all of you. I mean, code means just more. Like more code means more across the board. It's more of everything, not just output. It means, and I think this is, you should be clear on this. It doesn't necessarily mean better quality or increased trust. And so your teams do spend a lot more time reviewing what AI produced. And, those of you who are concerned about team skepticism, that's a major factor. And so, teams simply don't have the time to review everything at the level of scrutiny it needs. And I'll say that's been our problem for a while. As we across the industry, we've pushed for faster deploys, more frequent deploys, and this is great. But code review it's a good part of the job. It's an important part of the job, but it also can be a bottleneck. So uh, we raise some questions here, but underneath all five of these is one thing. So for 40 plus years, we've built software assuming the same input yields the same output. Determinism. That's what makes something like a regression suite actually work. But now we have the part of the pipeline that's generating the most code, and that's no longer true. Been a lot of discussion. We've talked with people like we're dealing with something that is so powerful, but is not deterministic. In the failure, we heard early on people would complain, oh, it's producing garbage code. The dangerous failure, in my argument, is not really garbage. You'd catch garbage if it was really bad, and you'd make adjustments, change out models, change your prompts, etc. The risk now is plausible and highly polished output. So it looks good on the surface, that's slightly different every time. So all of your old guardrails don't really transfer cleanly. You used to be able to look at the inputs and thoroughly, and then you trusted what came out because you have the same artifact every time. And so you had these things say, oh, we evaluated that tool in March, we approved it, great. But you can't use it as a control anymore because now it's a snapshot of something that's moving regularly. So now we have to engineer this entire system to assume that anomalies are going to happen. And we have to stop asking, did we prevent it and start moving to, okay, well, what's going to happen? How fast do we detect it? How big is the blast radius? So this is sort of, security where it's systems reliability engineering thinking, and it's applied to code generation. And the good news in all this is this isn't necessarily as new as it sounds. If in the past, if you had two engineers, you gave them the same ticket, you said, go write code, they're going to do two different implementations. So, we invented code review for good reason. It's because humans are non-deterministic. We're learning that models are too, and with the breakneck cadence of frontier model releases, they often change underneath you. So one quick anecdote, we had an internal incident recently where we had an LLM as judge doing internal evaluation, looking at the output of agentic analysis in our product. It caught a foundational model change that otherwise would have broken user-facing functionality. So thankfully, our internal model, our internal eval, caught it before this issue made it up to production. But these things are real. These things are definitely happening. We want to pause
Yeah,
for a second before we go on because I believe we have a question.
we do. Let me go ahead and I'll ask it because I think this one is right up your alley, Aaron.
Great, thanks.
Um, From my experience using AI, I have noticed that if you can master the context,
Mm.
then you can definitely get the AI model, no matter what model it is, to generate a good quality response. Is that true? Do you agree?
Fantastic question. I'm going to answer it from the standpoint of code and code generation. I think we use a lot of AI models in other parts of the development process. We use it definitely heavily in process engineering. We use it in product engineering, product management. But talk about creating code. Yeah, context absolutely matters. Fully agree. Not every team is there, not every person is there necessarily, and there are times where, depending on what you're trying to bite off, so you're trying to do something big. Let's say you're trying to do something ambitious and sort of one shot an entire feature. Oftentimes, in our experience, what happens is the context about that feature can make it through. But what ends up happening is that sometimes there are things that you want that you say are very important. They're in your agent instructions, and as the context gets very, very large, there's sort of a zone in the middle. And I think there's some terms of the internet that I don't remember right now for it, where it starts. It is not. You're not guaranteed for it to follow the rules and instructions. And so there's ways to solve that. There's certainly ways to solve it with, using subagents and having checks at the end and having maybe another check. But we've found that that process of context engineering is something you always have to do. So even though, and this is awesome, this is so great that you have a good quality response today, it's important to have the checks in place so that you are guaranteed that over time. Because sometimes these things that are starting to sneak in are more subtle. They show up as architectural changes. They show up as sometimes drift over um, a series of changes over time. Those are hard for a single PR review to catch. So, but big picture, agree with you. The models plus great context, yeah, it goes a long way.
Right on.
All right. Excellent.
Okay, so yes, next up,
Yeah.
AI generated code quality um, is definitely a concern. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, right? And I think that the real challenge is that there's a diverse array of concerns and there's a diverse array of stakeholders that hold those concerns near and dear, and you can see that reflected in the survey results. Um, I think that the micro level on this is that there's just a whole bunch of ways that things can go wrong, and we saw this in the survey results. Like the junior devs came up in the survey results, and that's something that you were talking a minute ago about, Aaron. Concerns about like how are we going to train these people up? The code delivering the functionality that was actually intended when the tickets were originally written, being another concern held by like a third of the respondents. Unintended dependencies and security vulnerabilities. These are both at about a third of respondents. And those can both be really nasty surprises, as we all know. Hard to debug changes also came in at about a third. So we've alluded to these at different points already in this conversation, but they're reflected in the data that came out of this as well. But I think the macro view is that it doesn't really stop there because people in operations care, people in QA care, people in product cares. The CEO definitely cares. Marketing's going to care if it involves customer data or customer facing resources. So this is a very rich area of concern that I think it's very safe to say we're still figuring out. We're still figuring out what the right answer is or what the right approach is in the environment we're now finding ourselves in as we're AIing all the different parts of the process to try to get this right. And we're actually going to see a little bit of that and people's thoughts on that in some of the slides that are coming up. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. What I would say you see here in these results is people doing more of the same. And and I'm sorry that may come off as a negative comment. I don't really view it that way. I like if it ain't broke, then great, then why fix it? because you can see the siloed concerns here, right? Where code quality analysis, automated code review, things of this nature. And you can't just, throw out what you've been doing. So investing in existing approaches to try to deal with this reality that we have right now, with the rapidly accelerating environment and the amount of code and all the people contributing to it. What I would say, however, is that as we talk with customers, as we talk with industry watchers like analysts firms, we can see this shifting, as organizations realize that maybe I went into this thinking this was a tooling exercise, right? The AI transformation of this engineering team is going to be about tooling up with AI all of the discrete functions, and we're going to get to the promised land. And that is a huge part of the journey. Don't get me wrong. And actually, it's sort of table stakes. Like if you don't do those things, the rest of those things don't have the opportunity to really matter. But once you get beyond this sort of tooling up the discrete functions, and make progress there is a dawning realization that this really is an organizational wide change that we're talking about that spans people, process, and technology. And we've spent a good amount of time harping on that already today and talking about some of the team dynamics and so forth a couple slides ago. But figuring out what this holistic approach looks like, I think, is very much a work in progress for most organizations in terms of how to get it right. So next up, quality and risk. And here are some thoughts that we hear or that we saw in some of the survey results that matter to folks. And I think this is a variation on a theme of the last couple slides, where I think the open question is, can the existing approaches that we're doing, perhaps automated, perhaps accelerated with AI, is that enough to scale to the new requirements? And I think there will be enormous gains there, and I don't think that can be discounted. But I think there's two important considerations beyond that. And the first is just our operational and our management systems. At a lot of organizations, these are tickets or tagging in some other system. And it's not just me. I mean, Gartner recently did a Magic Quadrant on this sort of general space in this area of engineering intelligence. And they actively raised this. One of their top 3 points in this report was a concern around ticketing, tagging, basically a garbage in, garbage out scenario, that these systems are so subject to human error. They are by definition very manually focused. They can be influenced by politics, any number of things, that there's a garbage in, garbage out. Because of all those problems, there's a good chance that there's garbage going in, which means there's a good chance that there's garbage coming out. And a different approach is required. This is, of course, our thesis for Flux, which Christina talked about at the very beginning of this webinar. But where you land on what the solution, I think, is secondary to identifying the challenge and coming up with whatever approach is the right one for you to sort of be able to have your operational systems for how you're tracking what's going on and how you're measuring progress suit the challenge of the scale and all the other sort of people and process changes that are happening in your organization. And this is true even if we just assume that everything gets better, like all of the AI gets better and it can check its own stuff, it can fix its own stuff. That is not going to eliminate some of these other concerns. So high-performing teams, what are they doing? What do we see them doing? Um, I'll start here, and without a doubt, people have acted on review capacity, and this is probably simply because it's the first thing that crops up. You know, you start generating more code, and hallelujah, like people try it and they like it, and then some more teams try, and then more teams try, and then maybe people outside of engineering try it, and you see that spike that we've been talking about a lot. Um, and so your velocity goes up perhaps by 10x, but you don't all of a sudden get 10 times the people to review all that code. And so people throwing both technology like AI assisted code review, as well as moving people around, taking some of those seniors, spreading them across a couple teams, and maybe they're doing more code review. Things of this nature is what we see people doing, is what when I talk with engineering leaders, the things I hear them talking about all the time to address this problem. But what about you, Aaron? What do you see here at Flux, or what do you see when you talk to customers?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, people are at all different phases here, and sometimes it depends on what they're dealing with as an organization. So certainly, if you're in a highly regulated industry, you're going to, start with governance. You're going to start with safeguards. Um, you mentioned it before. Review capacity is the thing that often flares up, and it's that's the thing that and if we talk about Flux for a moment, that is a thing that we care about as well internally. Things we're doing include, having multiple PR review agents cross-checking, making sure we catch things. We're starting to score PRs based on a risk profile, and determining when to get a human in the loop. And part of this is, as an organization, we've heard this from many orgs I've talked to, figuring out, okay, where are the ones where we're okay with that going out, because it's reversible, because we can roll it back easily. Where are the ones where no, we can't, and we definitely need to have a check, either because of the nature of the change or because of where it sits in the code base. I will admit some bias. We also use Flux to provide the engineer intelligence to give us the visibility. We use our own tool, so that we're able to see how these changes over time are having an impact on the architecture, how they are raising issues, how they're hopefully catch any trends that are happening across changes that might lead to less efficient or worse, less efficient code generation or worse incidents down the line. And just a quick note on humans. That is the part where I think, what we're hearing a lot from folks is that's where they're having the conversations. I mentioned before about teams. As they go on a journey, they're working closely with the members of their team and trying to and having an open conversation. The highest performing teams that we've seen so far are not simply mandating this on their teams and saying, this is it, this is how we do it, because this is changing. This is in flux across a lot of organizations. And so we are what we're seeing is the highest performing teams are those where they get their folks engaged, and it actually does have a positive side effect. It actually helps to overcome some of that fear, because now people feel engaged, involved, heard, and they can see where they can have the most impact.
Yeah, right on. All right. We're coming up on the end, so I want to remind everybody that we should have time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. So this is like last call to get your Q&As in using the Q&A function in Zoom down there at the bottom. What we wanted to share is a little bit of what this looks like in real life, from one of our customers, and kind of what their journey has been like so far. This happens to be a company called Cobalt. They are a pen test as a service cybersecurity company. And at the time that we engaged with them, there was a new head of engineering, who would come in with a mandate to, turbocharge this team, including by getting them to really lean into AI. Company had been around for a while, new leadership, and so looking to sort of rejuvenate across the board, including within the engineering department, and using the AI transformation as sort of the rallying cry for doing it. Because the perception was that at that time anyway, and maybe historically, engineering was a bit of a black box, not unusual, but by any means, to be fair. Lots of repos, not a ton of visibility into what shipped. And this new leader kind of looking at all of that and trying to figure out, how am I going to be successful fulfilling this mandate in this environment? And so we were thrilled to work with Mike at Cobalt, to help him on this journey. And there were a bunch of ways that we were able to do that. We can go ahead and do the build here. First of all, just like helping him understand the estate and what things are changing and what things aren't, to try to figure out of these repos which ones matter and which ones maybe like aren't even really doing anything anymore. Like, this sounds silly, but it's a very real concern, right? If you have hundreds of them. But beyond that, it was helping them sort of lean into AI and see how they were making progress. And that emboldened like progressively more and more people, and then more and more teams to sort of follow suit. And we've seen this transformation at lots of different places. It's invigorating. And what this allowed them to do, as you can see in the chart on the right, is frankly spend more of their time building features and less of their time on the other work. And I don't think this was so much because they weren't spending time on the non-feature work. It's just that they were able to turbocharge their ability to deliver features with code generation, basically exactly what you would think. But you can see a very impressive spike in the percentage of engineering that's delivering features through the course of last year. A low watermark you see highlighted here of around 9% to by the end of last year, 43% of engineering work being new features. This blew up in the company. Like it started as something that Mike used with his team to sort of show what a great job that they were doing and to get them like super psyched to do even more as they were moving into this year. But then as executive leadership found out about it, it wound up in the company's Q1 board deck. And as that happened, this chart in particular was flagged by FinOps, the finance department, because they operate like a lot of software organizations do, where they apply for R&D tax credits because that's available in most countries. A lot of offshore have similar sort of benefits to sort of drive innovation. And feature work is used as sort of a proxy for what R&D is. So anyway, they looked at the spike from 9 to 43 and said, first of all, Mike, great job. Like that's a nice transformation of the team. But second, we believe we can use this data to justify enhanced R&D tax credits, which saves the company non-trivial amount of money. Oh, and by the way, you should go back to the CFO and you should write off some of the expenses that you incurred to achieve these benefits against these R&D tax credits. And finally, if the only thing that we're maybe about as excited about the improvement in feature work from the team is the fact that we now have an auditable basis for R&D tax credits, since we understand this is based on actually looking at every single pull request and what's in the code and not just rough estimates by team members that might not hold up under scrutiny. So we spent a fair amount of time here simply because this is an amazing sort of opportunity for engineering leaders to radically improve their teams, and it's the kind of thing we might not see again in our careers, especially when you throw in the whole R&D tax benefits and the ability to write off the tooling. I mean, it's just whether you use Flux or anything, like please do this. This is a huge career opportunity for all engineering leaders out there in this moment that we're in with AI transformation. And then finally here, you can see this very nice quote from Mike in terms of how he felt about us acting as a cheat code and how we were able to help him, even though he was new to this particular role, both understand what was going on and have an impact. It's what makes it all worthwhile.
Hey, this has been great. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Aaron. We have come to the Q&A section of this webinar. And we did get a few questions that I am going to pose to the two of you to answer. And then after that, we'll wrap it up. And before we go on the questions, I'd like to tell everyone we are recording this webinar. We will send out the recording and the survey to your email afterwards. And for now, let's get some more questions in. We have, let's see, everything we have is ticket-based right now. You talked about code-first visibility. What would actually change what we catch? Would that actually change what we catch, or is that just a different way to look at the same information? Ted, you want to start with that?
Sure. I think both of those things are true. Um, on the first and most important point is just being able to keep pace with how quickly things are going. But the second thing I would mention is admittedly a work that we're doing right now that I'm very proud of, that Aaron and his team are doing to be able to do agentic analysis of these changes. And that's where there's an opportunity to do something really incredible that isn't quite possible in the same manner today. And that would be an example like you see a negatively trending DORA metric of some nature. And of course, you naturally want to understand what's going on. Well, why, we flag the DORA metric for you. It's based on reviewing individual PRs, so we know exactly where in the code base this DORA metric relates. And because we understand each of those pull requests, we can now do agentic analysis of them to realize, oh, the reason behind that negative shift is this. The team is churning because the complexity is off the charts here. It's really been spiking over the last 6 months. Or there's a new dependency with a security vulnerability, and they're trying to figure out, like, how do we fix that without messing up this application in some way? So the ability to automatically, on the back of a change of a metric that you care about, to kick off an agentic analysis of the code to get to root cause, maybe even remediation or suggestion about what to do about it, is definitely whole new territory in the space, and hence, our excitement. So anyway, that's my stab at it. But Aaron, most of what I talked about is stuff that you and the team are working on. Anything else you want to add?
Well, it's really good. Yeah. Yeah. So many of these other systems, many systems do use tickets, and there's a lot of data in tickets, but it's not all the team's work. I mean, we all know that things like work to knock down tech debt, refactors, small changes. Some of this work is stuff we have to do, but it doesn't get captured. It almost never makes its way back into the ticketing system, and so but that's important. Ted, you showed that the chart earlier, showing the sort of the work by type. Keeping the lights on work is work that we all have to do, and it's important to understand it, to quantify it, and to see how it's changing over time. And this is all part of that. So I think this is more especially true as you're adopting agentic coding. More evidence is in the code than in the tickets. So you mentioned rework. That's a key thing. If you're constantly reworking parts of the code, if you look at the root analysis, it may be that that constant rework could be something people are doing intentionally, or it could be misconfiguration in the agents as you're handing over more to them to remediate issues.
Awesome, thanks.
Sure.
Our second question, we've got a lot of repos and half of them nobody's touched in a year or more.
Mm.
Can you see across all of that, or does Flux only work well on the stuff people are actively working in?
Yeah. Okay. Good. We look across all of it, is the short answer. We look across the entire code base. So we analyze both the foundation code as well as any of the changes that are coming in. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of value in tracking those changes as they come in, because that's where you can catch trends before they become problems. But this is an approach that, if you have a PR only tool, if you're only focused on the pull requests as they come in, the changes, you're missing something. We believe that, both views are valuable to get a full understanding of the code base's health. Oftentimes there are lurking issues in old code, and then couple that with recent changes or changes to a part of the code that hasn't been touched in several years, and suddenly it's being touched. Why is that happening? We need to understand. It may be fine. It may be totally fine. You may be now able to deal with that thing that you didn't, you've been meaning to deal with for so long, or it may be indicative of problems. And so having that full view of the code base is something that's sort of fundamental to how Flux operates.
The other thing I'd add in here too is that the problem with the derivatives approach, like a ticketing system, is not just its ability to keep up with its pace, but the bigger you are and the broader and the more diverse you are. Maybe you have multiple business units. Maybe you bought 3 companies in the last year. Is another area where those derivative systems can really break down. Because let's be honest, no matter how well documented your best practices are for exactly how everybody's supposed to handle this in the PM side of things and in the dev side of things, for how tickets are filled out and maintained, it's practically impossible in a global organization that's changing dynamically, or like I said, where M&A is happening, to have everybody in lockstep. And so inevitably, it means under the best of circumstances, there's some percentage, probably not tiny, of stuff that isn't being done exactly the right way. And now that's a blind spot, or it's additional toil to try to get that into the format it was supposed to be in so you can compare it with everybody else. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Whereas if you just say, well, screw all that, we're just going to base all of this on, well, it's not black and white, but you get my gist. If the focus is on code-based analysis of this stuff, then at least we have a universal and consistent approach and measure for this that is built, a PR at a time from the bottom up, and thus less subject to human error and politics and everything else.
Awesome. Thanks for that. One last question, and then we're going to wrap up. This one says, We are already shipping AI generated code to production, but honestly, not sure that our review process is catching the stuff that actually matters. Have you heard anyone else that you talk to be worried about this?
Yes. Constantly. No, you're not alone in that. Yeah, it's definitely something we've heard a lot. And it is very much this uh it's lurking, as we mentioned before. We talked about incidents, how something like this can show up. These are the concerns that individual engineers have, senior engineers have, staff engineers have, all the way up to, engineering leadership. Review is going to look different. We talked about before for each company at each stage. There's going to be a mix of humans, classic CI/CD bots, apps that run checks, linters, et cetera. And those are more important than ever these days. And now we have AI code review as well, also powerful. And we discussed those. But as we discussed here, the concern on these is the volume, is the worry that something will get through. And so what we are seeing people do is an ensemble approach. So you are using those tools, you're using your linters. You have better filtering of change requests, of PRs, to figure out when to get humans involved. You're using starting to use LLMs as judges, so you have them checking each other to see, like, this. Let's look. This LLM did an analysis. Let's have another one see whether the analysis was good, having some scoring based on that. And then on top of it all, engineering intelligence, so you can catch trends that do not come out in individual PR. So again, the review process is intended to surface things that will become problems, but as the volume goes up, you're not likely to catch the really nasty issues, the really hairy ones, in a single PR. They're likely to something that's going to show up over time as the volume and the pace increases.
Awesome. Thank you both. So that will wrap up today's webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Ted and Aaron, for diving into these important topics with us. Again, a recording will be sent out after the webinar, as well as with the survey as well. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly. Thank you again.